If you came across a lioness lying motionless in the dirt, her body crawling with thousands of fire ants, what would you do? That was the exact question haunting Michael Hayes as he stood frozen in the brutal midday sun. He wasn't prepared for what he saw. Not emotionally, not physically, but something inside him refused to walk away. Michael was a field ranger with over 15 years of experience, but nothing had ever rattled him like this. The lioness wasn't just hurt. She looked like she had given up entirely. Ants covered her eyes, her snout, even the inside of her ears. She didn't flinch, didn't roar, didn't resist. Only hours earlier, Michael had been sitting alone in his ranger station, staring at a photo of his daughter who died in a car accident. 6 months had passed, and the pain was still fresh, unrelenting. He kept telling himself that going back to work would help. But most days, he barely spoke a word. That morning, a local farmer called in a report, said something was wrong near the riverbank, maybe a leopard caught in wire. Michael didn't think much of it. Calls like that were common, often false alarms. But when he arrived, the scene in front of him left him breathless. The lioness was young, maybe 2 or 3 years old, with a dull matted coat and deep gashes around her legs. Her back right paw was twisted unnaturally, caught in an old, rusted steel snare. The ants had found her first. And now they were everywhere, eating her alive. Michael approached slowly, every step crunching through dry grass and fallen twigs. The heat radiated off the earth in waves, but he didn't feel it. All he could see was her chest rising weakly, her eyes half closed under the swarm. She looked exactly how he felt inside. He tried his radio, but the signal was dead. Out here, communication was a luxury. That meant no help, no backup, and no tranquilizers beyond what he carried in his emergency kit. One dart, one chance. And the lioness wasn't stable enough to wait. Kneeling beside her, Michael used his shirt to wipe away the ants from her face. They bit his arms, his neck, even inside his collar, but he kept going. Her skin twitched under his touch, just barely. There was no sound, no growl, no breath of protest. Then, something strange happened. Her eyes opened just slightly, and for a brief moment, she looked straight at him. Not with fear, not even with pain, but with something he couldn't quite name. It was as if she knew he was there for her, the first soul who hadn't just watched her suffer. Michelson trembled as he loaded the tranquilizer dart. He wasn't sure if it would work or make things worse, but doing nothing was no longer an option. Just as he raised the dart gun and took aim, a deep, guttural growl echoed from the thicket behind him. He turned his head slowly, eyes wide. Michael's breath caught in his throat as the growl grew louder. He turned slowly, expecting to see another lion, maybe the male of the pride returning. But there was nothing, only thick brush and shadows. Still, the tension in the air was sharp enough to slice through. He didn't have time to hesitate. The lioness needed help, and every second mattered. With a deep breath, he aimed the dart at her shoulder and pulled the trigger. The dart hit just above the joint, and she let out a weak, pained groan before collapsing fully. Michael watched her closely, counting seconds in his head, heart pounding. If the dose was too low, she'd feel everything he was about to do. If too high, it could stop her heart. He'd used this drug dozens of times, but never under pressure like this. He moved quickly, cutting through the thick steel snare with his wire tool. Her leg was torn open, the muscle exposed, bone possibly cracked. Flies buzzed around the wound, and blood mixed with dirt and ant bites. Michael gritted his teeth, trying to keep his hand steady. With the snare finally off, her leg flopped uselessly to the side. He wrapped it as best he could with gauze from his emergency pack. Then he began brushing ants off her body, starting from her face and working down her spine, careful not to disturb the wounds. The bites were taking their toll. His arms were covered in red welts, his skin burning under the sun and the ants' venom. He paused only to catch his breath, then kept going, talking to her softly. "You're okay now. I've got you," he murmured, not sure if he was talking to her or himself. He needed to move her, but he was alone. The jeep was parked over 100 yards away, and there was no stretcher, no help. Lifting her wasn't possible. She was too heavy, so he did the only thing he could think of. He started clearing a path. With a machete in one hand and a fire in his chest, Michael hacked through the tall grass. He marked a trail back to the truck, all while checking over his shoulder to make sure no other predators were nearby. The silence of the bush had returned, but it wasn't comforting. After clearing the way, he returned and began to roll her onto a tarp he found in the back of his Jeep weeks ago. It was old and stiff, but it might just hold. Every movement made her moan softly, and it felt like the forest was holding its breath. As he tied the tarp around her body and prepared to drag her, Michael paused. The ant bites had broken his skin in places. His knuckles were bleeding, and he was drenched in sweat. But when he looked at her, he saw something else. Not just a lioness, but a creature refusing to give up. He couldn't walk away anymore. Michael dragged the tarp inch by inch across the brittle earth, his boots digging deep into the ground. The lioness's body was heavy and limp, her breathing shallow but steady. Every few feet, he stopped to rest, wiped his forehead, and checked her pulse. She was still with him. By the time they reached the Jeep, nearly 2 hours had passed. Michael's hands were blistered, and his shirt was soaked through. He managed to roll her onto the flatbed using leverage and sheer determination. His arms trembled from exhaustion, but he didn't stop. Not now. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other on her flank, making sure she was still breathing. The dirt road back to the ranger outpost was brutal. Every bump threatened to undo the fragile state she was in. Michael whispered to her the whole ride. "Almost there, girl." Almost there. Back at the station, he radioed for veterinary support and cleared the garage to act as a temporary triage space. He laid her on a clean tarp, turned on a fan, and brought out the first aid supplies. The leg wound had worsened, but she was out of immediate danger, at least for now. The vet arrived hours later, shocked by what Michael had managed to do alone. "You're lucky she didn't die on the way," she said, carefully inspecting the damage. They sedated the lioness again, cleaned the wounds more thoroughly, and administered antibiotics. "She's got a long road ahead," the vet added, "but she has a chance." Over the following days, Michael checked on her constantly. He started calling her Nala, not out of sentimentality, but because she needed a name, a reason to matter beyond just survival. She began to respond to his voice, blinking slowly when he entered, twitching her ears when he spoke. The other rangers thought he was becoming too attached. "It's just a wild animal," one of them said. But Michael didn't care. Every hour he spent with her chipped away at the numbness he'd carried since his daughter died. In saving Nala, something in him was being stitched back together. One morning, Nala managed to lift her head and lick water from a bowl. It was a small moment, but for Michael, it was everything. He dropped to his knees beside her and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "That's my girl," he whispered, eyes burning. Word of the rescue spread quickly through the community. Local newspapers ran the story of the ranger who fought off fire ants and dragged a wounded lioness across the delta. Some called him reckless. Others called him a hero. Michael didn't care what anyone called him. He only cared that she was healing. Then, 1 week after the rescue, something extraordinary happened. Michael opened the door to her enclosure and found Nala standing, shaky, favoring one leg, but standing. She looked straight at him, and in that moment, it was clear. She had chosen to live. And so had he. Nala remained under medical care for nearly 3 months. During that time, Michael practically moved into the rehab center. He slept on an old mattress next to her enclosure, waking at every sound, every shuffle. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Slowly, she began eating on her own, moving with more control, even playing with an old tire in the corner of her space. Michael found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time since his daughter's accident. Watching Nala heal felt like watching sunlight return to a room he thought was locked forever. There was talk about transferring her to a larger sanctuary down south, one with more resources. But Michael pushed for her to stay closer. "She doesn't just need space," he told the board. "She needs familiarity, trust." Deep down, he knew he needed that too. Eventually, Nala was moved to a protected wildlife reserve nearby. Her enclosure was larger, open to the sky, surrounded by natural terrain. Michael visited daily, no longer as a ranger on duty, but as something else, a guardian, a friend, maybe even family. Their routine became sacred. He'd call her name from the edge of the fence, and she'd lift her head and walk, still limping, but strong, to greet him. No roars, no drama, just a quiet presence. They didn't need words. Their silence said everything. Other rangers began asking questions, watching how she responded to him. Some brought their kids to see her. One child asked, "Why does she only come to you?" Michael smiled and replied, "Because I was the first one who didn't run away." Inspired by their story, the reserve launched a campaign about compassion and conservation. "Every life matters" became the slogan, with Michael and Nala as the face of it. Donations poured in, helping rescue other injured predators: leopards, cheetahs, even a wounded hyena pup. Michael's own healing was less visible, but no less real. He still carried the pain of losing his daughter, but it no longer owned him. There was peace now. Quiet, steady peace. And it lived in the daily rituals: changing Nala's water, brushing her coat, sitting beside her in silence. One morning, as he opened the gate to her enclosure, she walked toward him and rested her head gently against his chest. It was the first time she had done that. Michael closed his eyes, his hand resting behind her ear. He didn't say a word. He didn't just save a lioness from a cruel death. He saved himself from a slow one. In choosing to help her, he chose to feel again, to live again. And in the quiet space between them, both broken creatures finally found a reason to keep going.